I hear the dripping again, the constant drip, drip, drip of water. I blink my eyes open and try to focus to make sure I'm not in another nightmare. It sounds like another leak. This one might be the last. The last time I will hear it before the horrible conclusion to this ordeal. The last time hearing that telltale noise before the true nature of that loathsome portal is revealed and whatever hideous dimension hiding on the other side breaks through completely. The sound is growing louder, each drop has an exaggerated tone. It sounds like small explosions all trying to collapse the ceiling and engulf me in the dark abyss that I have already once been forced to endure. I just can't believe this could really be happening. It just can't. It swallowed people up, the portal behind that damn leak. I don't know what to do. Just a short while ago, my only problem would have been the water damage to my belongings. Indeed, such a mundane problem as a leak in the ceiling would just be a minor issue, nothing to fear except the repair bill. Yet I'm afraid it is a bit beyond that now. I shouldn't have waited this long, I should have just left. Yet where could I have gone? Maybe I should have paid more attention to who I was talking to and what they were saying. All too late now, I suppose. I have been living in this apartment for close to 6 months. I had moved into this dingy complex to a small studio apartment after I lost my job and had to find a part-time position at significantly less pay. I tried to stay optimistic, but even before the terrible reality of what I was stepping into was clear, I was still on hard times. I could barely afford this decrepit room as it was, and I had no family or friends to speak of that I might be able to move in with, so my options were essentially non-existent. Considering the dire situation, I found the cheapest accommodation I could, and what I found was my home in hell for the last 6 months, number 316 at the Greenfield Heights apartment complex. The amenities included paper-thin walls to hear all the drug deals gone wrong, domestic violence, and constant sirens of emergency vehicles blaring from all sorts of incidents, topped off with a nice turned-down service of package and mail theft to boot. All of these problems, though, feel small compared to the true horror of what the place had in store for me. No, it wasn't exactly a paradise, but I had to find the cheapest place I could. I was barely making a fraction of what I was before at my old job, and I needed somewhere to get back on my feet. I told myself it was temporary, and once I could get a better job, I would get out of here. When I had first arrived to look at the place, I had arranged a simple walkthrough with the landlord, Mr. Jacobs, a very unpleasant fellow who always looked perpetually angry and was constantly shouting in the halls and at the few miserable-looking staff who worked here. We walked up 2 flights of stairs, passing a wall of profanity-laden graffiti tagged along almost the whole length of it, leading up to where my future home was to be. Mr. Jacobs opened the door and the rattling handle nearly fell off in the effort. We stepped inside, and the dank room stank like a tomb. The tiny apartment was depressing, and when he went to turn on the main light, nothing happened. He scoffed and muttered a string of colorful language and grumbled that someone will bring a new light bulb. I told Rodney to check earlier, that lazy piece of shit. I didn't want to press the matter since he looked pissed off, so we went in, and he showed me what little there was to see of the tiny apartment. We had to rely on the dim light of the bedroom to see elsewhere since the main light was out. Despite leading the walkthrough, it looked like Mr. Jacobs was distracted. He was looking at the ceiling in the corner of the tiny living room with a concerning grimace on his face. He stared at it for a while and paused the tour. I found it a little weird. He finally looked back at me as if noticing that I was watching him stare at the ceiling, and he shrugged and asserted that you are going to want to get some buckets. When it rains heavily, that part of the ceiling leaks. Can't seem to find out how, since there's no leak on 416 above, but bad luck on this one. I guess that's the only reason the price is so low. He shot me a grin that I could only describe as enthusiastically malicious. After the brief walkthrough, Mr. Jacobs turned around and asked very bluntly, "You're not a troublemaker, are you?" His eyes narrowed and he looked very threatening suddenly. I assured him of my earnest intent and need for a place to stay, and he softened briefly. At least I think he did. It was hard to tell with him. He regarded me one more time and said, Good, we don't need more troublemakers, too many questions, always snooping around. If you have any questions, try to figure it out yourself. This isn't the Ritz, we don't take care of everything for you. You are going to have to make do as is. Something really bad like a fire, then you can call. But for minor shit, best to just figure it out yourself. Rent's due on the 1st, by the way. No exceptions and no grace period. Anyone who bums out on their debt gets their asses kicked out next day. Fuck tenant laws. He shot me another wicked smile and returned downstairs, leaving me with the keys, and just assuming I had agreed to move in. I was dumbfounded by the combination of his upfront hateful attitude and the subtext of certain things he had mentioned. What in his mind was a troublemaker, and what happened to those who asked too many questions? I couldn't believe I was going to have to live here. In a better position I would have left immediately, but it was either here or homeless. All the other places I had looked were too expensive, so I left and began packing my things. The whole situation was awful, but I had no choice. I moved in the next weekend. Moving day was as bleak as my mood. It had been raining on and off again all day and seemed to start heavily just in time to when I was moving my boxes, almost as if to spite me. I started taking my stuff upstairs to my new room. As I was taking the first box up the stairs, I thought I heard a gunshot. I rushed on in nervous tension, and as I was approaching my door, I heard a voice call out in a tone that was actually friendly. "Excuse me, it looks like you dropped something." I was surprised to see a woman standing in the hall with a look of friendly concern. As I looked down to see I had indeed dropped something from the broken box I was trying to carry upstairs. "Hi, I'm Maxine. I am your neighbor in 315. I introduced myself and was relieved to have found a friendly face for a change. "Hey there, I'm Greg. Nice to meet you." I held out my hand and she looked uncomfortable briefly and declined the handshake. "Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, I shouldn't, but it is nice to meet you," she said with another disarming smile. I was relieved to see someone who didn't look they were minutes away from killing me or someone else, though the paranoid part of my brain was begging the question why such a seemingly nice person was stuck here. I considered asking her but figured it would be rude to pry about her situation. She might have been like me and just on hard times. I was embarrassed when I realized I was just standing there after saying hello and stumbled for words, but she spoke first. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Greg. Stay safe and try not to let your spirits get down. It's easy in this place, but nothing bad lasts forever." She smiled and waved goodbye. I looked down to make sure the box was secure, and when I looked up to say goodbye, she was already gone. I wondered how she was so fast. Nevertheless, I felt slightly more hopeful that things might be okay after all. Another hour of moving boxes and my knees were on fire, but the meager possessions I had were finally stuffed haphazardly into the tiny apartment. I was dead tired, but it was only 4 p.m. I figured I had earned a nap though, and went into the tiny closet that was supposedly a bedroom. No furniture fit besides my old mattress that took up the entirety of the space. I laid down and started drifting off. The peaceful sound of rain started to get heavier, and then I heard a new sound which woke me from my doze. A tiny dripping sound coming from the main room. I remembered what Mr. Jacobs had said about heavy rain and a leak, and I got up quickly to make sure the water was not landing on all my boxes and getting everything wet. I looked up in the corner of the room and sure enough, there was a steady dripping onto one of the boxes below. I poked around and found the dishes box and took out a few pieces of Tupperware and a bowl and set one underneath the leak. I thought for a moment about calling Mr. Jacobs, but then remembered how he had given up on fixing this leak and realized it would do no good. I turned around to go back to bed when I heard an odd tearing sound like wallpaper being stretched to breaking point. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I figured it was just my nerves and I went back to bed. I slept for about 2 hours, and despite the brief rest, I had a vivid nightmare of drowning in a dark lake with no shores on any side. It was horrible, just sinking into a black watery abyss. I was embarrassed as I woke up with a scream, but relaxed as I realized it was just a dream and no one likely heard or cared that someone in 316 was screaming anyway. I figured the rain and that damn leak had got me thinking about water, and my negative mood may have contributed to a nightmare, so I brushed it off and went about trying to organize the chaos of boxes in some logical manner for this small space. Later that night, I had a cup of ramen for dinner and turned in early. I read a bit before bed, almost as if trying to postpone sleep for fear of sinking into that fathomless abyss again when I slept. Eventually, I started to get comfortable and thought I may fall asleep when it started again. Drip, drip, drip. The leak had resumed. It sounded faster than before, and I thought it was strange that I could hear it so vividly. I got up to see if maybe it had overflowed or something, and I was not prepared for what I saw. The ceiling where the leak was had an odd lambent light near the center, kind of like a black light. It seemed to be pulsing in time with the drops of water. There was an odd type of density in the air too, like it was too heavy and thick. It was maddeningly humid as well, despite the cold atmosphere of the room and outside. I was confused and kind of scared by the bizarre display. I just kept thinking to myself, it is only temporary. As soon as I can leave, I will. I can make it through anything short term. I took a step further into the living room and noticed a wet spot on the floor. There is no way it could be all the way over here. The bowl on the floor was not even full yet. I suspected a leak might also be over in this spot now, so I looked up and screamed out loud. There was what looked like a face pressing through the ceiling with drops of water seeping from the thing's mouth. I turned to run and tripped on the wet floor and toppled over, bashing my head into a wall and almost losing consciousness. I was trying to stagger to my feet after getting knocked senseless, and the memory of the face reminded me of my peril. I got to my feet and looked up in tense expectation. There was nothing there. No leak, no face, no glowing shifting portal. The only evidence of anything was a small wet spot on the ceiling about 9 inches across. At that point, I thought for sure that depression over my situation was causing me to go crazy and see things. I desperately wished I could be somewhere else just then. But it was late at night, and I needed sleep. I couldn't afford a hotel obviously, so I left my room and went outside to the parking lot to sleep in my car. Another week went by with poor work hours, barely any food, and bad sleep. Though the one bright side was the surprisingly good weather. Days went by and no odd events took place in my apartment. It was a struggle, but at least with a little sunshine, there was no leak to conjure up such terrible nightmares like what I had experienced before. I ran into Maxine again on the way to the laundry room and couldn't help but ask if she knew of anything having happened in my room before I moved in, like anyone having seen anything weird or the like. She shifted uncomfortably and looked down, pausing as if not wanting to answer. I'm sorry, I don't know much. I had not been here for very long when the last person in 316 had left. I say left, but I heard there was an accident of some sort. There was a lot of commotion and I had heard some strange rantings from the man before it happened. She took a breath to steady herself after the stress of recounting the story and looked away. I was away at work when it actually happened. Apparently, he had been found dead in the apartment. Some say he killed himself, drowning. From what I heard, he was a bad man. There are a lot of bad men that live here. The things that have happened that never got reported and the people that got hurt or worse, well... She looked away sorrowfully for a moment and resumed. Well, you wouldn't want to know. A coward like that would try and kill himself, but I think something akin to justice may have caught up to him, something that this place might need more of. When you live with the stain of hate and violence, it leaves something behind, and perhaps sometimes the world finds a way to wash it away and right the wrongs. Anyway, I don't like to think about it. I have to run. I have to get ready for work. Sorry I couldn't help more. I hope you stay safe and stay dry. You wouldn't want to get swept up too. She turned a corner and I saw a fallen cardigan. I bent down to pick it up and it felt wet, like it had been washed already. Not too weird if she just did laundry, but her footprints were soaking wet as well. I grabbed the garment and rushed round the corner shouting out, "Hey, Maxine, you dropped this." But she was gone. The wet footprints randomly stopped as well. How did she stop leaving them if her feet were wet? A few more months passed with no leaks and only a few nightmares. My luck turned sour again for different reasons though. I suffered a severe back injury at work. Since it occurred while working, I got some workers' comp so I wouldn't lose all my income. I did have to take time off of work, so I was forced to stay in my apartment all day and night recouping. To make matters worse, it was getting into the season for spring showers and the forecast was heavy rain for the next week. I was not quite bedridden, but walking and bending over was very uncomfortable. I considered taking a drive somewhere, anywhere but here, but I couldn't manage the stairs again today, and I knew I at least needed to actually rest for 1 or 2 of my days off. So I was stuck in the apartment, watching the clouds gather and the skies darken. I placed several dishes under the leak spot in anticipation, and I swigged some energy drinks and coffee. I would rest, but I disliked the idea of sleeping any more than I had to, since I still feared those disturbing dreams in the water. I tried to distract myself by watching some old DVDs since I had no streaming services to watch. As I started to relax around late afternoon, I was shocked back into a frenzied paranoia when the storm kicked up in intensity and knocked the power out. I tried not to panic and knew I had some candles or a flashlight or 2 somewhere. I would have to get up though, so I figured I would stay in the bedroom. I used my phone flashlight to find a candle and matches and hurried back to the bedroom just as the leak restarted and the drip, drip, drip was heard filling the bowls left out. I felt silly fleeing the leak like it was dangerous. I didn't know why that dream had affected me so much, but it felt wrong. I sat in the dark and waited for the power to return, but it did not. I fought sleep, but even in my paranoid state, I started to drift off. I was content that the door was closed at least, and it slightly muffled the sound of that constant dripping. I awoke to the sounds of running water. The drip was replaced by a torrent that almost sounded like a waterfall. I was too afraid to move, but I had to see if my room was being flooded. I got up painfully and stepped down into ankle-high water. Oh God, this is bad, I thought immediately as I moved to the door to see what had happened. I heard a singular splashing noise, almost like someone stepping through the water. My heart froze as I stopped just short of opening the door and focused on the sound. I heard the splashing again. It was definitely footsteps. I didn't know what to do. I tried to think who might break in. A robber? Maybe it was about the flooding. Maybe it was Mr. Jacobs after all. I grabbed the candlestick and lit the candle. If I needed to, I might be able to use it as an improvised weapon. If it could be a murder weapon and clue, then why not? I cautiously opened the door and there was a backwash of even more water on the other side. It almost knocked me off my feet. I stumbled through the door, struggling in the cold water. I knew it was impossible, but it felt like there was a current running through it, like I was standing in the mouth of a river. I finally stepped past the door and into the living room, and almost dropped the candle into the oddly surging waters. The sight before me was both amazing and terrifying. The water was moving. It was flowing into a whirlpool that was at the center of the room, but as it neared the center it inverted and seemed to be spiraling out from the ceiling rather than the pooled water on the floor, in a sight that blatantly disregarded all laws of gravity. The spectacle was so amazing I almost forgot the footsteps I had heard, and until they resumed, my gawking was broken and I saw large bursts of water splashing toward me. I heard an ear-splitting cry like the wail of a banshee, and suddenly the ceiling where the leak was coming from and the current epicenter of the vortex started to glow, and after a moment it turned deep red and a new horror occurred. The face I had seen in what I had hoped was a nightmare before was back. The ceiling seemed to shimmer now, almost translucent, and I saw the horrible features of a hideous form. White, pupilless eyes stared down at me, and a gaping, screaming maw began filling with water tinged with red. No, it wasn't water, it was blood. The vortex began spewing blood all across the room, and as I turned to flee in horror, I was wrenched from my feet by the invisible force in the water and dragged kicking and screaming into the heart of the vortex. My last conscious sight that night was being pulled up into my own ceiling and into the bleeding maw of that avatar of bloody nightmare. I woke up in the black abyss. The water was still mixed with blood, but there were no creatures. I was somehow buoyant and floated along in the shore, less sanguine ocean. I drifted along unable to sink or to fully rise up. After what felt like an hour of drifting, I heard splashing, and all of a sudden the sound got louder and louder. I looked around and saw the source of the noise. Bodies were falling from the sky into the bloody ocean. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. A literal storm of blood-soaked, featureless bodies came crashing into the water. I tried to evade them, but I could not dodge them all, and I was buffeted by the limp forms of countless bodies until I was pummeled below the surface of the water. I couldn't breathe breathe, and as I tried to surface, one of the bodies grasped my wrist and opened its eyes. On its previously featureless face, it now had oddly pulsating white pupils, and it burst what appeared to be stitching on its mouth in order to scream under the water. The sight and shock of that horrible scene woke me, and I realized I was laying on my back in my apartment again. The flood water was lapping at my face, and I was breathing in and choking on the water on the floor. I lurched up as soon as I regained control of my body, spitting water and gagging from the quasi-drowning I had endured. The water looked normal, no blood from what I saw, but the water itself was not a delusion or some trace of insanity. It was there. It was a bad scene. Tons of my things were submerged, and the water damage was extensive. Somehow it had risen to almost 2 feet high. I had to do something. I didn't expect much from this place, but this was a severe enough situation that the crotchety old bastard Mr. Jacobs was going to have to fix something whether he liked it or not, or they would be getting a lawsuit in short order. I figured some lawyers would take easy cases they knew they would win with no retainer needed if they got paid more at the end. So it would not be a bluff. I was dead serious. I almost drowned in my own apartment. I staggered to the door and managed to open it, draining tons of water out into the hall, but I didn't care. I just needed some fresh air. My back was on fire, but nothing would stop me. I heard a voice calling out to me. It was Maxine. "Hey, are you okay? I saw all the water and hadn't seen you around. Is there flooding there?" She asked with an odd look, almost like she knew the answer but didn't want to let on. "Yes, there is. It is pretty bad actually. I was just about to call Mr. Jacobs to do something about it." "Greg," she paused for a moment then continued, "you didn't see anything in there, did you? In the water, like something or someone familiar?" I was confused by the specific nature of the question. I was put off and unsure how she knew I might have seen something. "I am not sure what I saw. Why do you ask?" I responded. "No reason. Just be careful. It can be dangerous if you do. Don't worry if it is not where you belong. You won't get pulled in forever. Just be careful though. You don't want to risk it." A flash of morbid glee was evident on her face for a split second, and then it was gone. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. "Pulled in? How do you know about the leak? And if you do, what's behind it?" I asked with mounting suspicion evident in my voice. "You know, Greg, in many cultures the path between the world of the living and the dead is separated by only the slightest barrier, often a literal or symbolic body of water. Whether the river Styx, the lake of fire, the waters reflected at the feet of a torii gate, it is often just potent waters. Like all bodies of water, when they are contained somewhere there can be leaks. Sometimes the water is not the only thing that seeps out." She stopped speaking for a moment and fixed me with an intense stare that made me feel very strange. I did not know what she was talking about. Was she saying that portal leads to some sort of afterlife, like heaven, or more likely in this case, hell? "Did you just say?" And she cut me off, saying, "Oh, if Mr. Jacobs finally goes over there to fix your ceiling, let him know I had a concern I needed to express to him as well. It's been waiting for a long time." She smiled again in a creepy way that disturbed me. Yeah, sure, I guess I can do that. Thanks. See you later and hope you feel better. Those accidents can be rough. Best not sleep on your side and to drink lots of water. The right kind though." She winked at me and departed, and I was at a loss for what just happened. How did she know I had gotten hurt? I didn't tell her. And what was that thing about the right kind of water? My anxiety about the situation was increasing, and I was disturbed by Maxine's questions too. Maybe she was not so sweet and trustworthy after all. After far too long being ignored and dealing with the first sodden, now moldering cloths, boxes, and other personal effects, Mr. Jacobs finally scheduled a time to drain the last remnants of water and do something more concrete about fixing the leak. I was waiting patiently for his arrival, and there was a loud banging at the door. I greeted Mr. Jacobs, and he grunted at me and without looking at me walked past and looked up at the hole in the ceiling. He had an odd air of what almost looked like fear or concern on his face. After he walked in, another larger person in coveralls and holding a toolbox did as well. There was a large tarp or something that seemed odd to bring to this sort of job. It almost looked like a big sort of bag. They were both looking at the hole in the ceiling, and Mr. Jacobs turned on a dime and stared me down. "It's just been water leaking down, nothing else, right?" I thought the question was odd and I hesitated to answer since I was thinking of those vivid nightmares. I think he may have noticed that because his face sank and he glowered at me looking significantly angrier and more dangerous than before. Before I could answer, he shouted at me, "What did you see? Did something come out of the hole? Was it a person?" He looked manic and deranged, and I looked at the other man in the coveralls and he stood silent holding a sledgehammer that had appeared in his hand and watching the confrontation unfold. I don't know, I just saw the leak. What is going on? What do you think I saw? My neighbor asked me the same thing earlier. Mr. Jacobs' eyes narrowed. What neighbor? I haven't had tenants in 315 or 317 in over a year. I was confused. Maybe I had heard Maxine's apartment number wrong, but how could she be my neighbor if she was not in one of those? This must be some kind of mix-up, I figured. My neighbor Maxine, she said she lives in 315. I just saw her the other day and she asked if I had seen something as well. At the mention of the name, Mr. Jacobs' face turned white. You said her name was Maxine. She said that. You saw her. He was screaming at me asking more questions about Maxine like she was on America's Most Wanted. What does she have to do with this? I don't know what the hell is going on, I admitted. Ignoring my question, Mr. Jacobs began pacing and holding his hand to his head. The man in coveralls spoke for the first time. "Jack, we have to go. Let's find the body while the leak and portal are still here and dispose of the loose end." I gasped at the admission of both a body and that I was apparently a loose end to some sort of crime. I fucking know. Alright, make it quick. We are going to have to do too, so let's go before more people start coming home and we risk someone hearing. I fell back against the wall in shock as the large man hefted the sledgehammer and started stomping toward me. I was unarmed and injured. I didn't know what I could do, but suddenly the lights went out again. The door slammed shut, and as the three of us stood there in stunned silence, a slow drip began to trickle from the ceiling, each drop splashing off of the low-standing pool of water. The large man went to the door and tried to open it, but to no avail. "Jack, what is going on?" the man shouted to Mr. Jacobs. "I don't know, just use the hammer, kill him, and then bust us out of here, or just give it to me and I will fucking do it." They were going to kill me. I had to think of something quick, so I stammered out, "Wait, I don't know what is going on, you guys. You don't want to kill me. I really don't know anything. Let's just get out of here before the water gets much worse. I think something bad is going to happen." As if on cue, the dripping stopped and a torrent of water was disgorged from the hole in the ceiling, which now held a horribly familiar glow and was pouring a blood-red liquid into the apartment. There was a giggle followed by a blood-curdling screech, and the man in the coveralls with the hammer was wrenched up off his feet and dragged kicking and screaming into the water. Mr. Jacobs and I both watched as his entire head was forced under the water by some unseen force. The man was being drowned, and as he looked like he might kick up, a splash of water landed next to him, revealing a brief outline of a female form. The eyes were white, and it had a horrible smile on its face. Its unnaturally long hand was wrapped fully around the man's throat and was effortlessly throttling him. Mr. Jacobs saw something, or someone he recognized in the violent mist, and started sobbing and begging for mercy. "I didn't mean to, please. It was an accident. I would have been locked up. I couldn't lose everything. I had to." I sat in stark terror as the falling water from the ceiling became a storm. The millions of droplets highlighted the attacker. Her form was terrible yet oddly mesmerizing. She strolled along towards Mr. Jacobs, who was grasping at the door handle and tugging uselessly at it. He reached for the hammer when he was pulled toward the figure by a moving tendril of bloody water. "Just a little bath, Jack. That's all, it won't hurt much." He tried to scream, but his head was submerged in the bloody water. I saw the sentient waves of ruinous liquid grasp each of his appendages and tear him limb from limb in a bloody explosion. I screamed and stumbled away, wading through the water into my bedroom, and desperately pulled on the window to escape that way. I heard splashing footsteps and a soft, pretty tune being sung by an ethereal voice. Then I heard a giant crash and saw a portion of wall collapse along with more of the ceiling, and the sight before my eyes almost drove me insane. There was a vortex of bloody water sucking the maimed bodies of those men into the hellish portal where the leak originated, and at the center was the bloody figure smiling at me and waving a hand as I finally got the window to budge and fall out. I stepped outside and tried to descend the fire escape, but the surface was too slippery, and I fell. I screamed and plummeted down and thought I would land on my head and die. Yet as I fell, my descent slowed, and to my shock and horror, I realized the rainwater was mixing with the water from my apartment flowing out of the window, and I was being pulled back up into my room. I tried to scream, but I felt water fill my mouth. At some point in the nightmare ride, I blacked out again. That was the last thing I remembered before I found myself here again. As I listened to the leak once more, I wonder if it could have all been a bad dream. The water, the leak, the portal. It is all too much. It couldn't have been real. I will go into my dingy living room and see the water dripping into the bowl and realize it was all just a terrible dream. Yet when I sit up, I notice an odd breeze, and when my eyes focus in the dark, I see lights in the sky. The ceiling is gone. I don't know what is going on here, but I know I have to get out of here now. I hear splashing footsteps again over the ever-present dripping, and see in the sky now the light of the monstrous portal opening in the very clouds above. It is too much. I leap from the fire escape again. Somehow in my mad haste, I survive descending the fire escape, and I sit here now writing this impossible story in my car that I have been living in nearly a week after the fact. I heard on the news the reports of a structural collapse at my apartment, and the landlord being unavailable for questioning, presumed missing along with another man who worked at the apartment as a special contractor. I thought about Mr. Jacobs and the man in the coveralls and shuddered when I remembered them being drawn into that unholy portal in the ceiling. Apparently, it had not been the only disappearance in the building either. Around a year ago, there was a missing persons report for a Maxine Valoroso. I remember how Mr. Jacobs reacted to her name, and it made me wonder what really happened here before I moved in. I don't know who or what Maxine was. Maybe she was the same person in the report, changed somehow. Best I can guess, Mr. Jacobs had known something about her disappearance. Maybe he had killed her and somehow she came back for revenge. She mentioned the water washing away people's violent lives, and I shuddered when I considered her smile when talking about the last person in 316 and the overdue message she had to send to Mr. Jacobs. I didn't know if she was a ghost, a demon, or what. I also don't know the extent of her reach, or if she is satisfied with just those men, and who knows how many others she had washed away from that room with that dread portal. I suppose it doesn't matter to me anymore. I am never going back there. I gave all my belongings up for lost, and the building was condemned anyway after the landlord disappeared and the ceiling collapsed in several sections of the building. I think there are terrible things they will discover if they ever really investigate the building. Perhaps they will find bodies. Perhaps the bodies are all gone, sucked into that watery abyss, that eldritch gate to hell whose opening started with a simple leak. If something like that can happen, I just don't know. I don't know if anyone is safe anymore.
I've been in and out of prisons and jails ever since I was 17. I thought I had seen it all. Aryan Brotherhood members, stabbing guards, gang wars, escapes, and torture. I saw many things that still give me nightmares to this day. McDonald, 402202, the guard barked out. I jumped up, the thin mattress under me exhaling a whiff of stale air. I looked through the bars, seeing Correctional Officer Shea. C.O. Shea was a morbidly obese man with a penchant for being loud and lazy. I had seen a member of the Bloods punch him straight in the nose before, a scene I still remembered with some humor. Shea had crumpled like wet paper on the floor, screaming and crying as more COs ran over and tackled the inmate. "Yeah?" I asked. Shea handed me a sheet of paper. He regarded me with his gray, colorless eyes. "Congratulations. You're being transferred. Pack your shit. This is your last day at Springfield Correctional Center." You might think I would be happy to get a transfer. SCC was, after all, a shithole. The food was terrible and always cold. The place always smelled like bleach and chemicals. And at night, it got so cold with only my flimsy sheet that I regularly woke up shivering. The building was nearly a century old, and the fact that it still functioned at all was a miracle in itself. But to be honest, I was not thrilled about the transfer. I had made friends here and knew the lay of the land. I didn't have to worry about getting jumped or stabbed to death in the showers. As the old adage goes, it's better the devil you know than the one you don't. I was led out of my cell the next evening with all the worldly possessions I owned, which fit neatly into a clear trash bag with room to spare. I owned some prison clothes, toothpaste, a toothbrush, deodorant, a Bible, a pair of sandals, and a radio. I felt the unbearable lightness of my existence reflected in that bag as it smacked rhythmically against my leg. Good luck, friend Josh. A rather insane acquaintance of mine named Alvin called out from his cell as I passed down the bleak, concrete hallway. Take care, man. I hope we meet again on the outside, I said, waving, knowing I would almost certainly never see any of these people again. Hell, I hadn't even seen my family in over 5 years. None of them came to visit me anymore. No one wrote me letters, or put money in my commissary account, or sent me books to read. Well, we're all born alone, and we all die alone, I thought to myself as O'Shea walked by my side. He was breathing heavily, as if he had just finished running a marathon. I looked over at his face, seeing the burst capillaries on his nose from years of hard drinking, and the squint of his little piggy eyes. There was a slight gleam of intelligence and slyness behind that ugly mug, though. Well, amigo, Shay said in his slow, plodding way, I got assigned to go with you. I'll be your ride-along buddy. You excited or what? I smiled faintly at him. There are worse people than you here, Shay, I said. Far worse. I got on the prison bus in my bright orange jumpsuit. To my surprise, I saw the back was nearly empty. There was only one other prisoner in the back. Shay sat with us to monitor us. We were also handcuffed and ankle-cuffed. A chain ran down and connected the two. I looked over at the other prisoner, a black guy with a shaved head. I think he also shaved his eyebrows. I mean, I literally didn't see a single hair on his head besides eyelashes, which he apparently hadn't found a way to shave. Yet. Sup, he said. I nodded. Sup. We sat there in awkward silence as Shay plopped down hard on the bench between us. It groaned like a confused old man. So, what do you know about this place, Shay? I asked. He sucked down half a bottle of Coke and then heaved a deep sigh. I don't know much about it, to be frank, he admitted sheepishly. It is apparently brand new, though. They asked us to send a couple people who met certain criteria. What does that mean? The black guy asked. Shay gave him a serious look. Come on, Timmy. You know what I mean. Hardened criminals. People with long records who tour prisons, like some people tour French beaches. I scoffed. There are far worse people than me in prison, I said. Well, they asked for no murderers or gangbangers too. I don't know why, but maybe it is some new government program. They apparently call it an experimental prison. "What about me?" Timmy asked. Shay apparently knew what he meant. "You're not a murderer, Timmy," Shay said, his lips forming the faintest twitch of a smile. "You never. Well, there was that time my girlfriend got me to drop some acid with her. She went and killed her parents. Then we hit the road," Timmy said fondly, his eyes rising as if he were looking at a hovering angel in the far-off distance. "You were never convicted of any accessory charges, so it doesn't count," Shay retorted. "Oh, it counts," Timmy drawled in his slow, plodding way. "It counts. Everything in life counts. If I've learned anything in the last 36 years, it's that you can never truly escape anything you've done, good or bad." I couldn't see much from the prison van. There was a small, shatterproof window in the swinging back doors, but it only gave a fleeting view of what was behind us. I noticed the dark forests stretching out to the horizon over rolling hills. We drove for a few hours. The three of us bullshitted, talking about everything from sports to politics to the recent spate of fatal stabbings at SCC. I felt the van stop. I looked out the back window, seeing more endless trees. I didn't see a single house or car on the road we had taken. "This place is a ghost town," I said. Shay nodded. "Yeah, it's dead as Frank Sinatra around here," Shay said, wheezing out a high-pitched laugh at his own joke. "This area used to be big for coal mining, but as it dried up and people lost their jobs, they moved away. You know, my grandfather was a coal miner." "Good place to build a prison, huh?" Timmy asked. "If there's no one around." We were cut off by a clanging alarm up ahead. I heard something large moving, probably the gate opening. Then we were inside. I saw the guard towers and rolls of razor wire for a brief moment as the van pulled into an open garage. The darkness immediately blanketed us. The garage door slowly rolled shut behind us. Shay jumped up. "Let's get you boys inside so I can take off your handcuffs and everything," he said, motioning for us to follow. He pulled out a flashlight from his belt, guiding us through the pitch black. The dim light sent shadows racing across the room like groping tentacles. I caught glimpses of strange objects in the darkness. They looked like medieval torture devices. "What is this place?" I whispered. My voice echoed far too loudly off the cold concrete floor and walls. "Those look like torture devices on that table, Shay. I think those bloody things are thumbscrews, and that might be a pair of anguish." I pointed to the pear-shaped object with 3 wicked blades, whose points came together, sitting on a dusty shelf. The ornate handle had springs connected to it. The object could be forced into any human orifice, and when the springs were engaged, it would open like a flower inside the person's body, ripping their flesh apart and enlarging that orifice to a bloody, gaping hole. "How do you know so much about this?" Shay asked, giving me a strange look. He narrowed his little piggy eyes. He continued to fumble with the flashlight, peering around for a door to exit the garage. I looked back at the car and saw the driver just sitting there, his entire body as lifeless and still as a mannequin. "I've read a few books," I said, as Timmy interrupted us. "I see a little red light glowing under that door," Timmy said. Shay focused his flashlight on the spot. Across the room, I noticed what Timmy was pointing at. It was an ancient-looking black door. The wood had started to crack, and splinter down the middle. Engraved in silver on the front, it said, "Entrance to North Frost Penitentiary." "Hello?" Shay called toward the door as the three of us moved forward, the steel chains giving my steps a clinking rhythm. Shay reached the antique crystal doorknob. Timmy and I stood next to a dust-covered brazen bull, its bronze mouth wide open as if it were silently roaring at us. As Shay pulled open the door, crimson light flooded into the garage. Tinted black glass covered the back wall. A speaker button sat next to the window. I looked to my right, seeing a massive sign sprawled across the wall there. It read, "Rules for Personal Conduct at North Frost." 1. The COs without faces don't work here, and we don't know who they are. If you see one, press one of the buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch that are scattered around the complex. 2. When the red emergency lights come on, hide until they shut off. 3. Do not go into the medical ward for any reason. 4. The warden roams the prison every night at 3:33 a.m. looking for human meat. Don't let him catch you. "What is this? A goddamn joke?" Timmy asked, his dark face forming into a scowl. Well, Shay rubbed the back of his neck, looking like an obese little boy who lost his parents. I've never been here before, but this is all pretty unusual, I'll admit. A buzzing came from the back of the room, and suddenly, a garish, echoing intercom turned on. "Please remove their chains and direct them through the door on the left," a female robotic voice said calmly in a tone as cool as lemonade on a hot day. "Your transfer will then be complete." Shay sighed in relief. "Good," he grunted. "This place gives me the creeps." "Bro, you can't leave us here," Timmy protested. "What the fuck is this place? Where is everyone? Why is there a room filled with bloody, ancient torture devices next to the garage?" Shay put up his hands. "I'm sorry, son, but I have orders. I'm just a messenger here. I was told to transfer you here, and that's what I've done." He fumbled around his belt for his key ring. He came over and unlocked the handcuffs and ankle cuffs from both of us. I stretched, rubbing my wrists. I was glad to be out of those suffocating restraints. "Thanks for everything then," I said, picking up my extremely light garbage bag of possessions and heading for the door on the left. Timmy reluctantly followed behind. A sign on this door read, "To General Population." But when we got to the other side and it slammed shut behind us, I found a hallway filled with more red emergency lights streaming down. An involuntary shiver ran down through my body. I remembered those absurd rules someone had put up. What had it said about red lights? My mind raced for a few moments, then the answer popped up. It said to hide. A man shrieked up ahead, his voice riddled with agony and terror. The hallway split to the right and left, and I couldn't see anyone. Timmy and I stopped. "Dude, screw this," Timmy said, turning and running back toward the door we had come through. He tried pulling it open, but it was firmly locked. The scream came again, louder and closer, but this time it was cut off suddenly. I heard someone gurgling like a man with a slit throat trying to breathe. And then everything went deathly silent again. The gray concrete floor of the hallway had arrows pointing forward on it. There were no doors here. There was nowhere to hide that I could see. Timmy and I reluctantly went forward. As we got to the intersection, we saw the dead body of a man in a brown khaki uniform. His sightless eyes remained open. They stared up at the ceiling, glassy and still filled with horror. Deep gouge marks bit deeply into the flesh on his back and arms and chest. His throat had been cut or bit open as well. A spreading puddle of blood encircled his body. I saw a dark blur at the end of the hallway on the right. It looked like little more than a shadow. I whispered to Timmy, pointing. We decided to go left immediately. My heart was pounding at this point. I felt like a soldier walking through the no man's land of a war zone. I expected the attack to come at any moment. The hallway to the left had some doors. I sprinted forward as quietly as I could, with Timmy close by my side. I read the first door. To medical ward. Ugh, no, I whispered, going to the second one. I heard light footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw a creature from a nightmare sneaking up on us in the bloody glow of the emergency lights. Its skin was black and shiny, like that of a centipede's. In its general form, it reminded me of a hairless werewolf. It towered over us, its eyes like bone-white cataracts, its claws as long and sharp as a dagger. And yet, its face seemed almost reptilian. It had two small nose holes like a snake, and a jaw that unhinged and dropped far below its head. I saw rows of blood-soaked fangs. It gave off a low, gurgling growl that emanated from its chest. With a rush of adrenaline and a sense of mortal terror, I pushed through the second door without reading the sign on the front. Timmy was right behind me. I heard him scream as he fell into me. I found myself in a prison dormitory, and we weren't alone. As I hit the ground, I saw a white face peering out at me from behind the bunk bed. The man hiding there saw the abomination behind us and got up, screaming and running away. The creature growled, giving chase. In two powerful bounds, it had rushed across the dormitory and grabbed the man by the neck. I looked back at Timmy, seeing him groaning on the ground. Blood poured from deep cuts on his back. I grabbed him, pulling him up. Let's go. No time to, I said, when I was cut off by the sound of a neck snapping. I looked back, seeing the creature had twisted the man's head around in a circle. It raised the limp body to its massive mouth and severed the head in a single, powerful bite. Get me out of here, man, please, Timmy whispered as I pulled him back out into the hallway. I looked over, seeing another werewolf creature bounding down the hallway, chasing a man in a prison jumpsuit. I had no choice. I pulled Timmy toward the door labeled medical ward. With a creak of rusted hinges, it opened. We went inside to hide. Maybe there's something in here we can use to bandage you up, I said to Timmy, pulling him down the short hallway toward a room filled with single beds. I didn't know why the rules said to avoid this place. It looked totally empty. Against the back wall, I saw a glass cabinet filled with bandages, rubbing alcohol, Band-Aids, and other various first aid supplies. I ran toward it. Timmy limped along after me, still groaning. God damn, I think those claws went down to the bone, he said. It's gonna be okay, I said, as I pulled out some antiseptic and bandages, adding, it could have been a lot worse. The universe would immediately prove me right. I heard a slight giggling from under one of the beds. Timmy and I both froze. Two rotted hands reached out, dragging the mutilated body of a little girl behind them. She had patches of garish, black stitches running across her face hands and arms. Dark, clotted blood dripped from the sides. She wore a gore-smeared hospital gown and had no eyes. I looked into the empty sockets. They stared back at me like two black holes spinning in the void. As she rose, her giggles became full-blown laughter, a hysterical gurgling like the laugh of a dying person. Then she ran at me. I saw the silver gleam of a scalpel in her little hand. "No!" I screamed, raising my hands to protect myself. The scalpel came down, slicing across my palm. It cut deeply. A cold, burning pain ran up my arm. I repressed the urge to scream. At that moment, the red emergency lights flicked off. Bright, fluorescent lights popped on, flickering and strobing in rapid succession. Timmy ran forward, tackling the undead girl. But I saw more small hands reaching out from under the beds. Hands filled with sores and squirming larvae. I could see the bones of their hands through necrotic patches eaten into their flesh. I ran for Timmy, grabbing him and hauling him up. "Time to go, now!" I screamed, pulling him forward as more undead boys and girls rose up, all with sharp knives and surgical instruments grasped in their little hands. I felt a sudden pain in my leg. Looking down, I saw a knife sticking out of my thigh. The empty eye sockets of a little boy's face stared up at me, grinning like a skull. I collapsed on the ground as we were surrounded. I prayed to God then, knowing we would die. I prayed that He would forgive me for all my mistakes, because I was on a fast track to the afterlife and would be seeing Him in a few seconds. With a sharp cry of pain, I yanked the knife out of my leg, turning it on my attacker. Then a gunshot rang out. The head of the nearest girl exploded in a shower of bone fragments and dead maggots. I looked up, seeing Shay standing at the door, his pistol raised. "Come on!" he screamed. "Come on, you idiots! Let's go! Now!" Timmy and I didn't need any more encouragement. As Shay continued to blow apart the nearest of the undead abominations, we limped and scrambled towards him. My leg gave a shriek of pain with every step. We got out of the medical ward, battered and bruised, but still alive. "Why'd you come back, Shay?" I asked through pained breaths. Shay gave me a frantic look. When I got back out to the car, the driver was dead. His throat was ripped out or something. I don't know. I grabbed his keys and came back for you too. I don't know where we are, but I'm getting you out of here, he explained. I looked at him in amazement. I had never thought in a million years Shay would risk his life to save some scumbag inmates. "So, what's the plan?" Timmy asked, sweating heavily, his eyes wild and pained. "How are we getting out of here without dying?" She shrugged. "The door locked behind us when we came in," I said. "Unless we can break it down and get back to the car." We passed by buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch under glowing red emergency signs. I wondered if we could get help somehow through them. "Halt!" someone cried from behind us. I looked back, seeing a man in a black correctional officer's uniform. He ran toward us, his hand on the radio hanging from his belt. But something immediately seemed off about the figure. As he got closer, I realized why. He had no face. His entire head was just smooth, white skin, without hair or any signs of features. He spoke again, and the voice seemed to come from all around his body. "You must report to the medical ward," the strange figure said. "We do not allow injured people in the hallways." "No, we're fine," Shay said, grinning. "See, buddy? I work for the DOC too." He pointed at the identification clipped to his breast pocket. The figure raised his radio to his lips. "We have resistance near Dormitory 1, the fake CO said into his radio before any of us could stop him. Shay ran forward, knocking the radio from his hand. The CO instantly straightened up and whipped out his pistol, pointing it at Shay's torso. He fired, and I saw Shay's chest explode in a blossoming flower of blood. "No, damn it," Timmy said, running forward. I saw a silver gleam in his hand, and I realized he had taken one of the scalpels from the undead Shay had killed in the medical ward. As the fake CO spun to point the pistol at Timmy, Timmy ran into him, stabbing the scalpel deeply into the CO's neck. They fell together with Timmy on top of the fake CO. His body weight drove the scalpel deeper into the white, featureless skin. Blood, the color of soot, spurted from the wound. The gun went off, the bullet missing Timmy entirely and smashing into the ceiling. The CO's gurgling death gasps seemed to come from all around his body. I grabbed Timmy. "Get the guns," I said. "They're both dead. We need the guns." He nodded, grabbing the CO's gun and taking an extra magazine from his belt. I did the same with Shay's gun and magazine. I pressed the button labeled Emergency Dispatch as more faceless men appeared far off down the corridor. Then we fled as fast as we could from that hallway. But seeing as we were both in pretty bad shape, it wasn't very fast. At that point, I was just glad to be alive, though. We wandered around the prison, avoiding the faceless COs whenever we saw them patrolling the hallways. They would radio to each other, their voices always surrounding their bodies rather than coming from their heads, which I found extremely eerie and unsettling. A couple times, I saw men in black SWAT suits with automatic rifles gunning down the fake COs. I wondered if this was the emergency dispatch. Timmy and I avoided them as well, and we gave a wide berth anytime we heard gunfire. We passed cells with mummified corpses hanging from the ceiling. We passed dormitories where the victims of the strange werewolf-like creatures littered the floors, rotting and stinking like roadkill. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of another survivor, a pale face peeking out from some hiding spot. But Timmy and I kept pushing forward, looking for a way out. We were in a sprawling gymnasium, sitting down and resting for a few minutes, when we encountered the warden. We heard a demonic roar from the hallway, a mixing of many strange, inhuman tongues. As Timmy and I sat up quickly, a decapitated body flew into the gym, and a creature from hell followed after it. The body smacked into the concrete wall with a soft, fleshy whack. The warden stood 10 feet tall. He had on a black correctional officer's uniform and a leather visor cap. His face looked like it had no flesh. A thick layer of bone covered it, with 2 reptilian eyes peering out from behind slitted pupils. He hissed, a forked tongue shooting out of his gaping maw. His fingers looked like sharp daggers of bone. A smell like old leather and blood rose from his body. "Shoot it!" I screamed, raising the pistol and firing at its head. The first shot blew off its visor cap, revealing the hairless reptilian skull underneath. But the bullet only gouged the top of its skull. It ran at us with powerful, bounding steps, covering the distance in moments. Timmy and I fired as fast as we could as it got within a few feet of us. It bounded into Timmy like a freight train hitting a car. Timmy's body went flying and smashed against the back wall with the sound of bones shattering. I slammed another magazine in the pistol as the warden turned to me. We had hit it, I saw. One of its eyes had exploded in a shower of gore and vitreous fluid, and its head was bleeding badly. I raised the gun, aiming for the same eye and firing. The warden smacked his hand against his face as if he had forgotten something, falling to the floor. I ran forward, putting the pistol point blank against his ruined eye before emptying the clip. By the end, he wasn't moving anymore. "Oh God," I said, walking over to Timmy. I saw his shattered legs, his broken spine, and his snapped ribs. He coughed up blood. "I'm sorry, Timmy. I really am." His head might have nodded slightly as he died, giving a final death gasp before falling still. I found a ring of keys on the warden's body. In excitement, I ran downstairs and tried the locked door. It worked. I went to the van, pulling out the dead driver and starting it. After smashing through the garage door, I drove it through the gate. It did catastrophic damage to the prison van, but it got me far enough away before the engine gave out. I don't know what kind of prison that was, but I hope I never see that hellscape again.
For the last time, I am not a demon hunter. I've been saying this over and over, and all anyone ever says when they find out what I do is call me a demon hunter. Demons don't exist. God doesn't exist. How can demons exist if God doesn't? They can't. What I fight are spiritual inhabitants from the other planes that came to our world through fan service. See, not demons. Still don't believe me? Well, fuck you too, Steven. Here, you know what? I'll tell you about my first hunt. How about that? I'm loads better now than I was then, by the way. Okay, so it happened about 8 years ago. I was in a little Midwest town in late summer. The night air was hot and humid. It made my butt damp. Total swamp ass. I was on my way home from a Tinder hookup, which definitely wasn't the only one I've ever had, and I certainly made the sex at her. So anyway, I'm walking home through a dark residential alley where the narrow gravel road allowed for only one car to pass, and bushes had overgrown, reaching out in front of me. The summer air was thick and warm, making me sweaty and sticky. I'm feeling a little unsettled for some reason. Something felt off. It was like my spidey senses were tingling or something. It just really put me on edge. Then I hear this lady shriek and she comes bounding through her door and through her backyard just in front of me. She looks terrified and she's covered in blood. My first instinct was to run, to not get involved, self-preservation, you know, but the lady slammed against her stomach high chain link fence and flipped over it, landing awkwardly basically on my feet. Right in front of me, she shrieks again and tries to stand up, gripping my pants and then shoulder for support. She was pretty little thing, and if not for the weird way we met, I might have tried to talk to her and work my mojo. But that was not the time, and I knew it. I gripped her forearm, speechless, and she was all shaking and muttering with this 1,000-yard stare. I heard her say something about Rory and cut it off. I looked back to the house, and I entered some kind of hyper-aware mode where everything slowed down. I think I heard it called sword time before. It's when so much adrenaline dumps through you all at once that time dilates. You want to know what I saw? Guess. That's right. I saw my first spiritual inhabitant, from another plane. In the same doorway was this 35-ish-year-old beer gut guy standing there in a wife beater with nothing on below the waist, and his legs were covered in blood. He had something clenched between his teeth, and that was when I noticed he wasn't alright. Like there was something off with him aside from the blood and stuff. He had teeth that were way too long. They were still squared off like normal, not that sharp pointy teeth cliche, but that made it so much worse. They were just so much longer than they should have been. They also had those deep yellow stains that you normally see on old smokers. And he was floating, well, hovering. Is there a difference? Why am I asking that here? You can't respond. I googled it. Hovering implies a mostly stationary levitation, while floating moves around. So he was hovering there in the doorway. The girl sees this guy and starts to shake and shiver even worse, and she's still muttering to herself. She backs away and starts to pull me with her, but I'm leg locked. I can't move. Total deer in headlights moment. The guy starts to float over to us, crossing the small yard in about 7 seconds. He looked almost like something was holding him up by the armpits. As he gets closer, I can see why his legs were so bloody. His manly bits were gone, and his mouth, that thing that was in his mouth. Yeah, the girl loses her shit when he reaches the fence, literally, and that snaps me back to reality. I didn't know a lot of what was going on, but I could tell that the girl was in trouble, and Dick Teeth was the bad guy. I fell into a kind of reaction-based moment. I can recall bits and pieces of what happened, but pretty much everything was done on autopilot. I shifted my feet and heard metal move across the gravel. I looked down and believe it or not, there was a convenient katana just sitting there. No, there wasn't a katana. I wish it was. That would have been so cool. It was actually about 2 feet of rebar. So the girl let me go and began to take small steps backwards. I locked on Dick Teeth. Dick Teeth's jaw is vibrating and he's squishing his thing. I can see where some of his unsettlingly long teeth have dug in. He doesn't even look at me though. He's totally locked onto this girl. I reached down and grabbed the rebar, noticing how rusty it was, and I remember trying to figure out when my last tetanus shot was. I didn't know the best way to swing the rebar, but it felt like I wouldn't be able to swing hard enough. An image flashed through my mind of a baseball player ready to hit the ball. They lift their legs, stomp, rotate at the waist, and swing through the motion. So I do just that. As I'm swinging this rebar, I feel like I'm moving so slowly. It felt like I couldn't have even hurt a small child if I had swung this rebar at them instead. But then I watched the rebar sail through Dick Teeth's teeth and disappear inside his mouth. Broken bits of his teeth go flying around and his chew toy gets ejected from his mouth, spinning off into the horizon. My eyes flicked up and he was looking at me, staring into my soul with these wide, emotionless eyes. I suddenly felt itty-bitty, scared. My rebar exited through this guy's cheek, and the whole process also broke his neck. Next thing I know, I'm jumping off the top of the chain link fence, holding this rebar in a reverse grip like some kind of contract killer that takes contracts in both construction and murder. The inhabitant is side-eyeing me, and it's yelling, I think. Blood and tooth bits fly out of his mouth as he watches me ascend upon him. Then I woke up in jail. But don't worry, the girl was okay, and I got out. The heralds came and got me. I don't think they like me though. They are a bunch of lunatics with a hard-on for Jesus. And not like a little chub. I'm talking the whole 4.5 inches, rock hard and ready. They wear these corny white and gold robes and consider themselves the Lord's elite. Really? Pompous shitcakes, more like it. The heralds are a secretive group of religious fanatics who believe they are on a divine mission to protect the world from demons like Dick Teeth. They believe that these entities are the result of humanity's waning faith and that they must cleanse the world of these creatures to bring people back to the true path. Fucking psychos. They've got this whole hierarchy and structure too, complete with rituals, chants, and a strict code of conduct. They're essentially a cult, but with better marketing. They run out of an old church on the edge of town, which they've converted into their headquarters. Inside, it's all dark wood, flickering candlelight, and the faint smell of incense. The heralds bonded me out of jail, so I guess they did something right. Sucks for them though, because I never made it back to my court date. Finally, the church pays the state without using it to leverage political power. Wow. Their leader, Father Gabriel, is this intense, charismatic guy with a silver tongue and a piercing gaze. He's convinced that I have a special role to play in their mission, despite my repeated insistence that I'm not a demon hunter. He's always trying to recruit me, saying that I have a gift for dealing with demons. Welcome, my friend. I'm glad you decided to meet with me. We have much to discuss. Father Gabriel said, I know you prefer not to be called a demon hunter, but your actions have proven otherwise. Your encounter with the demon was not a coincidence. You have a gift, a purpose that aligns with our mission, he began, his voice steady and compelling. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I told you time and time again, I'm not interested, and it wasn't a demon. I saved that lady just like anyone else would have. Father Gabriel's expression remained calm, though a hint of a smile played at the corners of his lips. He nodded thoughtfully. I understand your reluctance, truly I do. You see yourself as an ordinary person who did what was necessary in an extraordinary situation, but not everyone would have acted as you did. Many would have frozen or fled, yet you faced the demon and saved that woman's life. He leaned forward again, his eyes intense and sincere. We often resist the labels and roles that others place upon us, especially when they involve responsibilities we never sought. But consider this, demons are becoming more frequent, more dangerous. The world needs people like you, people who can stand against these threats. I crossed my arms, leaning back in my chair. Let's say I join your party of cross-dressers, what's in it for me? Kay. He leaned back, considering his words carefully. The Heralds are well funded, as I mentioned. While we are not a typical organization with conventional salaries, we do provide substantial compensation to our members. Your needs will be more than adequately met, and you will receive a monthly stipend to ensure your financial security. The exact amount can vary based on your level of involvement and the danger of the missions you undertake. For a new recruit, the stipend typically starts at around $5,000 per month, with the potential for significant bonuses for particularly dangerous or critical missions. He leaned forward once more, his eyes locking onto mine. So, while we can certainly discuss and negotiate the financial details further, I hope you see that what we offer is more than just a salary. It's a comprehensive support system designed to help you succeed and thrive. Does that address your concern? I shook my head, unimpressed. I don't care about the other stuff. That's only $60,000 a year to risk my life. I think DoorDashers make more. Double it, and I'll consider it. Father Gabriel's expression remained calm as he listened to my response. He nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Compensation should reflect the risks and efforts involved. Let's adjust that. We can offer $10,000 per month, bringing your annual compensation to $120,000. Plus, there will be significant bonuses for high-risk missions and other incentives. He paused, letting the offer sink in. Does this meet your expectations? And that's how I started working for the Heralds. They send me out solo, but sometimes I have to work with people. Gross. And the feeling is mutual. I don't pray to their baby-eating, furious, crusade-encouraging, nihilistic deity. Gabe knows this, so I only go out with another man when it's really bad. Not like date. I'll skip the boring stuff. Quick reference. I crossed my fingers while I swore an oath. I got trained. I got paid. I moved out of my mom's basement, and now I'm renting a top-floor apartment in the party district. Blah blah blah. Gabe sends me on my contract with Father Rob. He's this short, fat dude with a face like a pizza. His upturned nose, squinty eyes, and friar tuck haircut makes him look like he's constantly sniffing shit. He's a total joke, always trying to act tough but failing miserably. No one respects him. He's like a yappy little dog that thinks he's a pit bull. All arrogant and insecure, he brags about his divine mission one minute and whines about being unappreciated the next. Working with him is a nightmare. He's always complicating things and his humor sucks. I can't remember the cartoon, but there's this kid that wears a red tracksuit, has a big gold chain around his neck, and gold rings, and he's a total D-bag. He looks like Rob. You don't want to hear about this Porky Pig vegan though. Let's get to the juicy stuff. Father Rob met me in the dingy basement of the Herald's HQ, where they do most of their briefings. He was puffing and sweating like he'd just run a marathon, which for him was just walking down the stairs. Alright, listen up, he wheezed, trying to catch his breath. We've got a little one, a sick child in Rollins. Parents made report of a demonic presence, possibly a class 2. Father Rob glanced at his notes, then back at me. Alright, here's the rundown. Listen up because I won't repeat myself. What? I asked, and the idiot fell for it. I said I won't. He noticed my chuckle and glared, slapping the folder down on the table. Take this seriously. His annoyance wasn't well hidden. I think he was embarrassed. After a few more moments, he picked the folder back up and continued. The possessed kid is Jerome Carter, a 9-year-old boy. Typical symptoms: pale, sleep-deprived, bloodshot eyes, and wild. Used to be a sweet kid, now he's a mess. It started a few months ago, talking to himself, toys moving, cold spots in the house. Parents brushed it off at first, then things escalated. Mrs. Carter found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m., speaking in some unknown language, eyes completely black. Scared the hell out of her. Mr. Carter saw it too. That's when they called us. I rolled my eyes. Cut to the chase, Rob. What's the plan? He glared at me but continued. You and I will enter the house in the late afternoon. We'll perform a full sweep, identify the demon, and neutralize it. Simple enough for you. Neutralize? I questioned. He's a kid. How do we neutralize a kid? Rob looked at me like I'd just asked him what color the sky was. We use gear, duh. Didn't they teach you anything in training? He said, still wheezing slightly. I scowled at him for a moment before expertly dodging his question and then asked, gear? Rob's eyes lit up, probably the most excitement I'd seen from him. Standard exorcism kit, holy water, blessed blades, and salt. Lots of salt. We'll also have a few special items, a sanctified cross, anointing oil, and a portable EMF meter to track the entity's movements. Someone's horny for gear, I muttered. Rob turned a new shade of pinkish red, but otherwise ignored my remark and handed me a duffel bag filled with the gear. Don't screw this up, he spat, looking at me with those squinty eyes. The last thing we need is another incident like the one at the Ryler's house. After that, we walked back up the stairs, leaving Rob huffing and puffing again. I didn't know if he was actually going to be alright, and I was fairly worried about the Friar Tuck wannabe despite my disposition. We got into a white, almost totally inconspicuous white van, except for the mural of Jesus riding a scorpion in the desert, covering the entire driver's side with the words, "The Heralds," arching across the top of it. Do you remember how I said Rob had an awful sense of humor? I'll regale you with a few I remember from the drive. Remember this. After every punchline, he laughed so hard that he cried. It was so stupid. Here we go. Why was Adam a good runner? Because he was the first in the human race. Why did the grape stop in the middle of the road? Because it ran out of juice. Why did Noah have to punish the chickens on the ark? They were using foul language. Why couldn't Jonah trust the ocean? He just knew there was something fishy about it. Yeah, I'm sorry you had to read that. I've held that in for 8 years, suffering in silence. Who knew talking about my troubles would make me feel so much better? We pulled up to this rundown house at the end of a gravel road. 2-story house with a basement. The paint was peeling, the once white exterior now a grimy gray. The yard was a jungle of weeds, and the cracked walkway looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Heavy curtains covered the windows, making the place look even more suspicious. A rusty swing set creaked in the yard, and the porch light flickered like it was straight out of a horror movie. This is fucking spooky, I said, taking in the shithole in front of us. This looks nothing like that house from the pictures. Are you sure this is the right one? Father Rob waited for a moment, and then took a serious tone as he spoke. The devil can work in mysterious ways. I've seen ruination like this only a few times. This might be worse than we thought. Cool, that's what I wanted to hear. Fuck. The family was advised to leave the house at least. We stepped out of the car and at once, I'm hit with that tingling sensation. It almost made it hard to breathe. Oh wow, I said, sounding winded. This pressure is way more intense than the first guy. Father Rob looked at me, raising an eyebrow quizzically. Pressure, he said. Yeah, that sinking feeling. I felt it when I fought Dick Teeth, and I feel it here too, but it's much worse. Do you not feel it? Dick Teeth, he asked, looking flabbergasted. At that moment, someone screamed from inside the house. It rumbled the earth beneath our feet. I froze up and stood there dumbstruck again while Father Rob ran across the front yard to the door. He looked back at me once he was on the deck. This is only for the strong, he said, prayed, then entered the house. That pissed me off. It felt like he was mocking me, taunting me, ass face, but it got me to move. I ran up to the house and shoulder charged the door. I collided with it, and it didn't budge an inch. I don't know how they do it in the movies, but I call bullshit. I bounced off the door like it was trampoline, spilling my salt all over the front porch and sliding back across the deck on my ass. Rob opened the door with a shocked and confused look on his face. "Did you just try to ram the door down?" "Shut up," I groaned from the ground. He offered me a hand to help me up. I grabbed it and it was slick with people grease. Disgusting. My hand slipped out of his and I fell back on my ass. He apologized and tried again to help me up, but I shoved him away and got up on my own. I grimaced at the slimy sheen on my hand, then wiped it off on Rob's robes. Normally, they get really mad when you touch their robes, but I think he accepted it as fair. And with that, we entered the house. Shutting the door behind us, the pressure I felt was stifling. It was like the constant urge to sneeze, but in my brain. The layout of the home was simple. The front door opened into the living room at the left of the house. To the right, beyond the living room, were the kitchen and laundry areas. To the left is the master bedroom with an attached bath. The house had 2 sets of stairs. One was a zigzagging ascending staircase off of the living room which lead to a guest room on the left side and the shared bathroom and Jerome's room on the right. The second set of stairs led to the basement and was located just past the laundry room. The house reeked of ammonia. Don't know what that smells like. Think old cat litter. Father Rob looked around for a few moments and then called out, "Hello, is anyone hurt?" We heard the scream and he was cut off by the sound of something skittering up the basement stairs and into the kitchen, making the hanging pots and pans clang. A shiver ran down my spine. The pots and pans hit each other like a kitchen wind chime until their sound faded away, and then it was dead silent again. Rob and I looked at each other. He was sweating like a greased pig. I imagine I wasn't much better at that moment though. Pensive moments passed. "Hello," Father Rob called out again, a little more hesitantly this time. "Nothing. We are here for Jerome Carter. If you're Jerome, can you please meet us in the living room? We want to help you." Another rumbling scream came from the right. It sounded like a little boy. Both Rob and I ran into the kitchen. The screaming stopped just as the kitchen came into full view. No one was there. We looked at each other and Rob pulled out a crucifix. Speaking over his shoulder, he told me to arm myself. Seeing that this was just a kid, I decided to use the rest of my salt. I opened the pour spout on the Morton's salt and held it club, ready to swing it down and pepper the kid if needed. Approaching the laundry room, the scent of rot invaded my nose. We both raised our free hands and buried our noses in the crook of our arms. Rob entered the laundry room first and stopped in the doorway, wide-eyed. I pushed past but stopped only a step beyond him. The laundry room was more like a 3-walled closet with the washer and dryer on one side and a hanging rack on the other. The floor was covered in the messy remains of 50 or so small animals. I could identify the fur of raccoons, opossums, squirrels, and a skunk, and the brittle bones of several small birds. Flies buzzed loudly around the corpse pile, and I have no idea how we didn't hear the flies or smell the corpses even in the kitchen. We heard a faint creak from the basement staircase. Both of our heads turned to look at the stairs as something quickly clambered down them, out of view. Another chill ran down my spine. "Jerome," I called out loudly, feigning a bravado while now cupping my free hand by my mouth. "We're here to help you. Are you okay?" Nothing responded. Rob and I shared another tense glance at each other, then he walked past me and toward the stairs. I followed close behind. He smelled like old ham. Holding the crucifix in front of him, he rounded the corner to the basement, visibly shaking. His nervousness made me more nervous. We stood at the top of the basement stairs, peering into the darkness below. The light from the living room cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls, making the basement seem even more menacing. Rob's breathing was shallow and quick, matching the rapid thumping of my own heart. "Let's go," Rob whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. I nodded, though every instinct in me screamed to turn and run. Instead, I tightened my grip on the salt container and followed him down the creaky wooden steps. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the tension between us. As we descended, the scent of rot grew stronger, mixing with the stale, damp air of the basement. The bottom of the staircase opened into a large, unfinished space cluttered with old furniture, broken toys, and stacks of cardboard boxes. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered intermittently, casting erratic beams of light across the room. "Jerome," Rob called out, his voice trembling. "We're here to help you." The only response was the soft rustling of something moving behind the boxes. Rob raised his crucifix higher, and I held the salt container like a weapon, ready to swing at the first sign of trouble. "Come on, kid," I added, trying to sound reassuring but failing miserably. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to help." A figure emerged from the shadows, small and hunched over. It was Jerome, or at least what used to be Jerome. His skin was pallid, his eyes sunken and dark, and his movements were jerky and unnatural. He was missing his bottom lip, and blood stained the front of his once white shirt. He clutched a blood-crusted and tattered teddy bear in one hand, the other hanging limply at his side. "Jerome?" Rob asked again, taking a cautious step forward. The boy's head snapped up and he let out a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were entirely black, drool and blood mixed as he parted his teeth. He let a large glob of blood-red saliva fall from his mouth, and I watched as it fell and splattered on the floor. In the center of it was his tongue. He took a step toward us, his movements almost puppet-like. "Stay back," Rob commanded, holding the crucifix out in front of him. Jerome stopped, tilting his head to one side as if contemplating Rob's words. He stared at the crucifix for a moment. Then, without warning, he lunged at Father Rob and headbutted him in the chest. Rob stumbled backward, squealing as he lost his breath. I wildly swung the salt container and it scattered salt in the air, some of it landing on the boy's skin. Father Rob fell backwards and hit his head on the concrete floor. He was out cold. The boy landed on all fours at the bottom of the stairs and paused as his skin smoked where the salt had landed on him. He watched it sizzle, then his head snapped up to look at me. He had the deepest look of hatred I've even seen. It paralyzed me. He scrambled up the stairs on all fours, leaving me in the basement with Father Rob. I checked his pulse, and he was okay. I tried to lift him up and carry him at least out of the house until he recovered, but his was too slick. "Seriously, Rob, at least shower before work." Instead, I had to flip a couch that was down there on top of him. Then I piled some boxes on top of that so if Jerome came back down and tried to do something to Rob, I'd be able to hear it. Seeing as the salt was tried and true, I kept that in my right hand. I spun my tool belt to put the blessed blades under my left hand in case force was necessary and moved quietly up the stairs. Now, I'm pretty dumb, okay, but I'm not dumb enough to call out this kid's name again. I reached the top of the stairs and quietly walked past the corpse pile in the laundry room and headed into the kitchen. I scanned the kitchen for any signs of the boy before I moved onto the living room. I think I forgot to mention that they had vaulted ceiling in the living room. I entered the room and moved along the right wall while I searched the house, salt held high. The only thing in the living room was the grandfather clock and its constant tick-tock, tick-tock. I looked up at the banister, knowing Jerome's room was up there. Still, I continued to work around the room until I made it to the far side, the master bedroom. I cleared the bedroom and the bathroom, pausing briefly to look at a family photo on the wall. Jerome was a cute kid. He looked almost nothing like that monster in the basement. I shuddered, leaving the photo behind. I paused at the bottom of the staircase, watching as it seemed to grow longer the more I observed. The staircase gave me vertigo, something I was not used to. I grabbed the handrail, willing my feet to move. Every individual step felt more and more oppressive. I paused halfway up the stairs and listened. I was listening for the inhuman movements. All I heard was the sound of the grandfather clock's tick-tock, tick-tock, and the racing of my own heart, noticing it synced up at a 2-to-1 with the clock. It was so quiet. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out. It sounded like a gale in the silence. I shook my hands in front of myself and started to move again. Once I reached the top of the stairs, I headed left to the guest room first. I opened the door, clenching my jaw as it creaked open. I looked at Jerome's door on the far side of the hallway, expecting it to fly open at any moment in protest to the noise. I refocused myself and checked the guest bedroom. Nothing clear. I stood in the doorway once more and looked at his door. I felt as though the walls were staring back. I sighed heavily, steeling myself, and crept toward Jerome's door. First though, I had to clear the bathroom. The bathroom has 2 doors, one for the hallway and one for Jerome's room. I hoped with everything I had that Jerome's door wasn't open. I quietly opened the bathroom door and it was closed to my relief. The bathroom went like this. The wall to the right of me held the sink and the door into his room. The wall goes left from there and has a linen closet, and then the shower. The wall straight across from me held the towel holders and the final wall held the toilet. I began my search. I decided to start with the shower because, of course, the curtain was drawn shut. I approached the shower curtain as though it were a bomb, ready to explode at any moment, creeping forward sideways, step by step. I took a deep breath when I got close enough and reached for the curtain, gripping it softly between my thumb and my index. I paused for a long moment, still holding my breath, listening to my heart beating and that tick-tock, tick-tock. My arm moved, almost against my will, and ripped the curtain open. It slid across the hanger line with a deafening clatter in the silence. Before me lay an empty bathtub. I exhaled a long, tense breath and then moved on to the linen closet. I was operating on precedence then, completely burnt out after that. I opened the closet door, making it creak loudly, and noted the roll of toilet paper on the shelf. There wasn't room for much more in there. I quietly shut the door and then walked straight over to Jerome's door. I grabbed the final door handle, pausing only for a moment before I opened the door, a level of acceptance settling over me. The room had an unnatural deep purple tone to it, and it smelt of putrefied, rancid meat. The air itself was rotten. On first inspection, the room was otherwise empty, except for the bed and desk in the room. Common sense tried to come back to me, tried to tell me to run because I wasn't safe, but I silenced it with another breath. I crossed the room and stood in front of the closet door, knowing this was the last place he had to hide. I wanted to throw up as a knot formed in my stomach and crawled up my throat. Nothing to it but to do it. I threw open the closet door, scattering salt immediately and bracing myself for whatever came next. That just so happened to be not a single thing. I visibly relaxed, dropping my shoulders, crouching and putting my hands on my legs. Then I noticed something strange on his desk, which was around the bed on the other side of the room. I walked over to it and picked up a small wooden box. It had these weird symbols on it, and some dirt still clung to it, probably from being buried before. It was a Dybbuk box. Jerome opened a sealed spirit box and got himself possessed. What an absolute shame. I pocketed the small box and suddenly all the hair on my body stood on end. I was going to die somehow. I turned around and it was Jerome, peeking over his bed, watching me, his face showing absolute ecstasy. He must have been hiding under the bed that entire time. I screamed, and he quickly skittered out of the room like a cockroach. He ran into bathroom, slammed the bedroom bathroom door slammed shut, slammed the other door slammed shut. I ran for the third door, the hallway door from the bedroom, but it was sealed shut. Not wasting any time, I tried the bathroom door, which opened as it should have. No such luck on the final door. I braced myself and kicked the door, but it was like kicking concrete. Frustrated, I screamed at the door. I pounded on the door and screamed for help. Rob was out there with that thing, and I was trapped, unable to do anything. I hoped to the universe that he would wake up and be able to defend himself. After doing this until my voice burned and door was spotted with blood from my fists, I walked to the back wall of the bathroom, collapsing against it. I was so exhausted. I propped my arms on my knees and hung my head. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing, completely recollecting myself. I needed to think about how I was going to get out. There had to be a way. After a few minutes, it finally occurred to me I hadn't tried the window. I lifted my head and shifted my weight forwards to stand up. I noticed for the first time that the linen closet was cracked open. Against the floor, impossibly low for the space, was the bloodied smile of Jerome. He had been watching me that whole time, and it showed on his face with total clarity. The sick smile with no bottom lip leaked blood. His eyes were bloodshot, almost completely red like he hadn't blinked once that whole time. Spit and blood collected against his chin and on the floor in a small pool. When our eyes met, he shrieked an inhuman noise. I was lifted by an unseen force and thrown through the hallway door. I blasted through the door like it was made of paper and over halfway across the hallway, stopping just past the banister. Thankfully, shock had my back and I stood up. Jerome was standing in the broken doorway. That intense rage was back on his face. He shrieked again and charged me. I grabbed what salt I had left and flung it at him. It hit him with a loud sizzle, and it looked like I had poured hot grease on him. He faltered and slowed down. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the blessed blades and threw them at him. The first clattered off the ground a few feet in front of him. The second buried itself hilt first in an emerging hole on his stomach. The blessed blades acted as a multiplier, instantly causing the sizzling salt to basically act like lava. He wailed in pain, grabbing the banister and practically melting in front of me. I didn't even think about what I was doing. I took 3 big, fast steps towards him, jumped and drop-kicked the little shit through the banister. He broke through the wood and sailed out into the air over the middle of the living room. He hung in the air for but a moment, then fell. He landed in a soggy heap, skewered on some of the banister wood at Father Rob's feet. Father Rob then began to say a prayer. Stupid, right? He was soup, the inhab was cleared. And before some self-righteous Karens say, he could have been saved, shove it up your ass. The kid died days before we got there. He was a corpse inhabited by a spirit that was sealed in the Dybbuk box. He was nothing more than a new shell for a naked hermit crab. I am not a religious man. That was my mistake. Growing up, my grandparents were my whole world. They were religious fanatics who believed in hellfire and brimstone. Every day, they preached the word of the Bible with a passion that bordered on madness. Sundays were sacred. Church was a ritual, a place where they surrendered their souls. They were good Christians, as they often reminded me, and I was supposed to be one too. As a child, I soaked up their teachings like a sponge. I wanted to be just like them, and I thought the Bible held all the answers. I spent countless hours reading scripture, my eyes wide and innocent, believing every word was gospel. My grandmother always said I'd grow up to be a priest, and for a long time, I believed her. I was her little disciple, a mirror of her devotion. But then everything changed. Middle school came, and with it, the kids from my neighborhood. They were different, looser, wilder. They did things kids that age do. Skateboarding, playing ball, cursing, watching things we shouldn't have. My mother worried I spent too much time with my grandparents and encouraged me to play outside, to be a normal kid. I adapted quickly, shedding my religious skin like a snake. Soon, I was dressing differently, talking differently, and doing things my grandparents would have condemned me for. By 16, I was experimenting with drugs, losing my virginity, living life on the edge. I was just a teenager having fun, but I knew I was straying far from the path my grandparents had laid out for me. I still visited them sometimes, but I never talked about what I was doing. The Bible, church, those things felt distant, irrelevant. I preferred my phone and video games, my cousins and friends. My grandmother noticed the change. She'd pull me aside and warn me not to push the Lord away, not to forsake the teachings. I'd brush her off, saying I was just having fun, but she became desperate, almost frantic. She begged me to stay consistent, to keep learning before it was too late. The look in her eyes was wild, unhinged, and I left that day feeling uneasy. Hell, my grandmother talked about it a lot. As a kid, I was terrified. She said that listening to earthly music or watching anything that didn't involve the Lord was a surefire ticket to damnation. So I lived in fear, trying to be perfect, turning off the television if anything non-Christian came on. I even scolded my mother for listening to secular music. But when I started hanging out with other kids, that fear melted away. By the time I felt truly free, I was rebelling against everything I'd been taught. I wrote anti-religion papers in high school, lashing out against the institution I felt had shackled me. I grew to resent my grandmother, her constant warnings about hell, her strictness. It all felt like a psychological prison. The older I got, the more anger festered inside me. I imagined all the kids who grew up fearing eternal damnation, just like I did. I decided to live for myself, not for some fictional deity. I became an agnostic atheist, skeptical of everything, even the existence of God. I figured there might be something out there, but I wasn't sure what. When I met my wife in grad school, she was studying mathematics while I pursued creative writing. Two sides of the spectrum, yet we clicked. She was stunning, almost otherworldly, and I couldn't believe someone like her lived in our small town. I approached her in the student center, and in a twist of fate, she needed a book I was returning. It felt like luck, and for the first time in years, I considered there might be something more. 5 months later, we found out she was pregnant. I didn't care that it was soon. I loved her and wanted to be the best husband and father. I proposed, and she said yes, but there was a catch. Her parents insisted on a religious ceremony. Despite my feelings, I agreed for her sake. Her happiness was worth more than my disdain for religion. Her parents were nice enough but reminded me too much of my grandparents. They spoke of God often and made me pray with them. It brought back all the old feelings of discomfort, but they weren't pushy about it. They just wanted me to feel included, which I respected. I spoke to my wife about how we'd raise our child, wanting to be on the same page. She was understanding and agreed to let our child decide about religion when they were older. I was relieved, content even. But everything changed in the last 2 months of her pregnancy. That's when the strangeness began. My wife started throwing up blood, dark, thick blood. I rushed her to the hospital, but the doctors found nothing wrong. They ran tests, checked everything, but she and the baby were healthy. I chalked it up to some weird symptom, but it didn't sit right with me. Then came the cravings. Pregnant women have strange cravings, but my wife's were unsettling. She craved blood. She wasn't drinking it like some vampire. She'd prick her finger with a thumbtack or give herself paper cuts and suck on the wounds. I noticed it a few times but said nothing, hoping it was just a phase. One night, I woke up to find her sitting up in bed, the lamp casting eerie shadows on the wall. She was repeatedly stabbing herself with a thumbtack, sucking on her thumb with an almost feral intensity. I grabbed her hand, demanding to know what was happening. She confessed that something about the taste of blood soothed her, stopped the pain from the baby kicking. She said it was the only thing that helped. I was horrified and insisted she see a therapist, hoping it would end the madness, but things only got worse. The day my son was born was the happiest day of my life, but that joy quickly turned into something else, something dark and cold. The doctors, the nurses, everyone who saw him commented on how different he was. The doctor who delivered him even said, "I feel like your son is going to change the world." At first, I thought he was just being polite, but the look in his eyes told a different story. My son was beautiful, unnaturally so. Even as a baby, he had a strange, magnetic quality that drew people to him. They'd stop us on the street, gushing about how adorable he was, how special, but I never felt comfortable. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He was too aware, too quiet. As he grew, the oddities only multiplied. He never laughed at cartoons or cried when he was alone. He just stared, as if lost in thought. My wife brushed it off, saying he was just introverted, like she had been as a child. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then there was the Latin. By the time he was 9, he could understand it. Not speak it, not yet, but he knew what it meant. I discovered this when we visited a history museum. He stopped in front of a display of artifacts from the 7th century, his eyes locked on a piece of parchment with Latin scripture. He was reading it, not just looking, but reading. I asked if he knew what it said, and he nodded. I asked him to repeat it, but he shook his head, his eyes never leaving the text. My son was a genius, that much was clear. He excelled in school, picked up languages like they were nothing. He was popular too, always surrounded by friends. Even outside of school, people seemed drawn to him, like moths to a flame. My wife saw it as a blessing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all wrong. One day, when he was 11, we were at a little league soccer game. My son was a star, naturally talented. But during the game, another kid slipped and twisted his ankle. The boy screamed, crying for help. My son ran over, kneeling beside him. The adults rushed over, but when they reached the boy, he stood up, saying he felt fine. His pain was gone, just like that. Everyone praised my son, calling him a good luck charm. The cheers and adoration echoed in my ears, and a chill ran down my spine. I remembered something my grandmother had told me all those years ago, a story about the Antichrist. She said one day a boy would be born who would grow up to be universally loved, performing miracles that would deceive the world. People would hail him as the second coming of Christ, but he would be the harbinger of the end, the beginning of the apocalypse. As I watched my son, smiling and waving at the crowd, I couldn't help but wonder, could he be what she prophesied, the Antichrist? And if he was, what did that make me? I tried talking to my wife about it, but she wouldn't listen. She believed our son was a miracle, that he was destined for something greater on this earth. When I told her she was starting to sound like a fanatic, she became defensive, insisting that he was special. Her voice wavered with emotion, her eyes wide with a fervor I hadn't seen before. I could feel the tension rising, a thick fog of unease settling over us. Not wanting to upset her further, I let it go. I shouldn't have. I could give you countless examples over the years of the strange things my son did. Always so joyful, always so eager to help others. There was an eerie perfection to everything he did, a calmness that felt unnatural for a child his age. But it wasn't until years later that I truly understood the horror of what I had brought into this world. A few weeks after his 22nd birthday, our carpet was worn and frayed, so we decided it was time to replace it. I asked my son to help me cut the old pieces, and he did it flawlessly, his hands working the blade with an eerie precision. I was so caught up watching him that I lost focus on what I was doing. My hand slipped, and I sliced my thumb open. Blood poured from the wound, thick and dark. I could see cartilage and bone, and the pain was blinding. My thumb throbbed with an intensity that made my vision blur. I knew I needed stitches. I was preparing to wrap my hand and rush to the hospital when my son walked over, calm as ever. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch at the sight of my mangled thumb. Instead, he grabbed my hand with both of his grip firm yet strangely soothing. He looked me straight in the eyes, his gaze steady and unnaturally intense. For a moment, I was lost in his eyes, an abyss of calm that washed over me, dulling the pain and the panic. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic, as he said, "I'll never let anything bad happen to you. I'll always help you." He released my hand, and when I looked down, I felt a jolt of shock that nearly knocked me off my feet. My thumb, my mangled, bleeding thumb, was completely healed. Not a scratch, not a drop of blood. It was as if nothing had ever happened. I stared at him, my mind racing. He smiled at me, a serene, almost knowing smile, and went back to cutting the carpet as if nothing had happened, as if what I had just witnessed wasn't impossible, as if he hadn't just performed a miracle, or something much darker. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my thumb, whole and unblemished, where there should have been a deep, throbbing gash. The pain had vanished, but in its place, a gnawing unease had taken root, growing stronger with each passing hour. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind like a broken record. My son's words echoed in my thoughts, chilling me to the core. The memory of my grandmother's voice kept intruding, unbidden, her dire warnings from years past surfacing with startling clarity. I hadn't thought about her in years, but now, every word she'd ever spoken to me seemed to take on a new, terrifying significance. Was it possible that she had been right all along? That my rejection of her teachings had blinded me to the truth? The thought twisted in my gut like a knife. Driven by a rising sense of dread, I found myself leaving the bedroom and descending the stairs in the dark. The house was silent, save for the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I moved as though in a trance, my destination clear in my mind: the library. The small room was lined with bookshelves, the dusty spines of countless volumes bathed in the pale light filtering through the window. I began searching, pulling books off the shelves with trembling hands, until I found what I was looking for, the old Bible I had owned since childhood. It was buried deep in a forgotten corner, stuffed into an ancient briefcase I hadn't opened in years. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed and brittle. It felt strange in my hands, almost foreign, like an artifact from a past life. I opened it, flipping through the pages with a desperation that surprised me. My fingers moved with a familiarity I hadn't known I still possessed, as though some part of me had never forgotten the lessons I'd once held so dear. I found the verse I was looking for, the one my grandmother had recited to me over and over. As I read the words, a cold shiver ran down my spine, a sense of foreboding settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. And then that awful feeling, the sensation of being watched, of something unseen lurking just out of sight, descended on me with terrifying clarity. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I turned slowly, dread clawing at my insides, and found my son standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice soft and curious, the innocence in his tone at odds with the sharpness in his gaze. I tried to smile, to steady my voice, but I could hear the tremor in it when I replied, "Just going through some old memories." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine, and took the Bible from my hands with a gentleness that was almost unsettling. "Why do you have this?" he asked, looking down at the book with a strange expression, as though it were an object of both fascination and disdain. "I wanted to remember something my grandma told me," I said, the words sounding hollow to my own ears. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to the ottoman in the corner of the room and sat down, the Bible still in his hands. For a long moment, he simply looked at it, his fingers tracing the edges of the worn cover. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost casual. "Nothing in this book is real," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. I felt a chill creep through me, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. "What do you mean?" He looked up at me then, his eyes piercing, the innocence in them replaced by something far older, far darker. "It's fiction," he continued, "just a collection of stories. But I can do more than this book ever promised. I can perform miracles, not just read about them." There was something in his gaze that sent a wave of fear crashing over me, a primal terror that I couldn't quite explain. "I've read this book," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "and it offends me. It feels like it's talking about me, but it's all wrong. I'm the one who can truly help people. I'm the one they should believe in." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, as he spoke with a conviction that was terrifying in its certainty. He stood up and walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. I could see the fear in my own reflection in his eyes, and I knew he saw it too. "Don't be afraid of me, Dad," he said softly. "I love you. It hurts me that you don't love me back." In that moment, guilt washed over me, drowning out the fear. I reached out, pulling him into a hug, my heart breaking as I whispered apologies into his hair. He returned the embrace, his arms wrapping around me with surprising strength. "It's okay," he murmured, "but you need to be ready for what's coming." "What do you mean?" I asked, pulling back to look at him. His smile was gentle, almost reassuring, but it did nothing to ease the growing terror in my chest. "People will learn the truth about me. They'll see that they don't need to believe in the Bible. I'm the proof they've been waiting for." As he turned and walked away, the room seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting ever so slightly. I stood there, trembling, unable to move, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. It was only when I was sure he was gone that I finally allowed myself to breathe again. Slowly, I made my way back upstairs, the events of the night replaying in my mind like a horror film I couldn't turn off. My wife was still asleep, oblivious to the nightmare that had unfolded just downstairs. I knelt beside the bed, my hands clasped together so tightly that my knuckles turned white. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, I prayed. I prayed for strength, for understanding, for salvation from the darkness that had crept into our lives. But most of all, I prayed for my son, the boy who wasn't quite a boy, the child who carried within him something far more terrifying than I could ever comprehend. That night, I finally managed to get some sleep, though it didn't last long. I woke up suddenly, my body tense and unresponsive, as if I were being pinned down by some unseen force. Sleep paralysis, I thought, trying to rationalize the terror creeping over me. I had experienced it before, many times over the years. It was never pleasant, but this time felt different. I lay there, unable to move, every muscle in my body locked in place. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to call out for my wife, but no sound escaped my lips. I could only stare helplessly as my closet door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. Fear clawed its way into my mind, and I felt an icy chill wash over me. A shadowed figure emerged from the darkness of the closet, moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps. Every hair on my body stood on end, my skin prickling with dread. I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was powerless, trapped in my own body. In that moment, despite everything, I found myself wishing for my son to appear, to save me from whatever horror was coming my way. The figure sat down on the edge of the bed, right where my wife had been sleeping moments before. I could feel its weight pressing down beside me, but I couldn't see it clearly, only a vague, dark shape in the corner of my vision. The presence was suffocating, its malevolence palpable. "You're playing with fire," it said, its voice a low, rasping whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't go back to something you rejected. Those who reject don't get to come back." I could feel its breath against my ear, cold and unnatural, as it continued. "You belong to me now, and so does he." With those final words, I was suddenly released from my paralysis. I bolted upright, gasping for air, my heart racing. I whipped around to find my wife still lying beside me, untouched, as if nothing had happened. The morning sun was just beginning to seep through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room. I sat there trembling, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. Had it been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear? My wife stirred beside me, her eyes blinking open sleepily. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to tell her everything, what had happened the night before and the horrifying dream I'd just had. As I spoke, the words tumbled out in a rush, my voice shaky with emotion. I told her that I believed our actions had damned us, that our son was a curse, a child of the devil himself. My wife listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply got out of bed and walked toward the door. She paused in the doorway, looking back at me with a mixture of pity and anger. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "Get your head straight. Come back when you're ready to accept our son for the angel he is." I watched her walk away, my heart aching with a pain I couldn't put into words. Feeling lost and desperate, I decided to go to my grandmother's grave. She had passed away a few years ago, and though I'd been at her funeral, I hadn't felt much then. But now, kneeling at her grave, I felt a wave of guilt and regret wash over me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice choked with tears. "I know you were trying to protect me. I didn't listen, and now I don't know what to do." I bowed my head, pressing my hands together in a prayer I hadn't said in decades. I begged for forgiveness, for some sign that I hadn't been forsaken, that God hadn't turned his back on me. I knew deep down that whatever that thing had said to me in my dream was a lie. I clung to the belief that God's love was infinite, that no one was beyond redemption. As I prayed, a sudden clarity washed over me, like a bolt of lightning striking my soul. I knew then why I had experienced all these things, why I had been shown what I had been shown. I had to warn others. I had to speak out against my son, to preach the word of the Lord and expose the truth about what he was. I knew what I had to do. With newfound resolve, I hurried back home, ready to confront whatever awaited me. But as I entered the house, my heart sank into my stomach. There, in the living room, was my wife, kneeling on the floor. Behind her stood our son, holding a steak knife in his hand. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice barely more than a whisper. My wife turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a strange calm. "I'm tired of you speaking against our son," she said. "You've never accepted him since he was born. We're going to prove to you that he is the answer the world needs." My son's gaze met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something dark and unfathomable in his eyes. "You need to be ready for what's going to happen," he said, his voice eerily serene. Panic surged through me and I fell to my knees, begging him to stop, tears streaming down my face. "Please, don't do this," I pleaded. "I'll do anything you want, just stop." My wife looked at me with a mixture of pity and resolve. "This is the only way," she whispered. Without hesitation, my son reached forward and slit her throat. Blood sprayed across the room, splattering against the walls and floor. my wife gurgled, choking on her own blood, her body convulsing as she struggled for breath. I watched in horror as her life drained away, her eyes staring blankly ahead until they went still. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking uncontrollably as sobs racked my chest. My son, still calm, walked over to my wife's lifeless body. He knelt beside her, placing his hands over the wound in her neck, and began to whisper something under his breath, words I couldn't understand. To my utter shock, my wife's eyes fluttered open. The wound on her neck was gone, her skin smooth and unbroken, as if nothing had happened. She sat up slowly, looking at me with a serene smile. "I told you," she said softly. "Please believe me." My mind reeled, unable to process what I had just witnessed. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But as I stared into my wife's eyes, I knew there was no denying the truth any longer. Whatever my son was, whatever power he possessed, it was beyond anything I could understand. And in that moment, I realized with chilling clarity that my nightmare had only just begun. I fled from my home, the terror of what I had witnessed pushing me to seek any kind of salvation. My legs carried me to the nearest church, driven by a frantic desperation to find help. Panting and disheveled, I burst through the heavy wooden doors and stumbled inside. The familiar scent of incense and old wood filled my senses, but it offered no comfort. I found a priest in the dimly lit sanctuary, his face etched with the calm assurance of his faith. I poured out my story, my voice trembling as I recounted the horrors I had seen, the miraculous healing, my wife's death and resurrection, and the chilling words of my son. I hoped desperately that this man of God would believe me, that he would understand the gravity of what I was saying. But as I spoke, I saw doubt and disbelief cloud his eyes. His response was a dismissive shake of the head, a firm but gentle assertion that such things could not be true. It was as if he were under some spell, hypnotized by my son's influence. The priest's denial cut deeper than any blade, leaving me feeling utterly abandoned. I left the church in a haze of despair, my faith in organized religion shattered. It became clear to me that no one would believe my warnings, no matter how fervently I tried to convince them. I realized that my son was far more than just a child with extraordinary abilities. He was a dark force, a harbinger of something far worse. I am writing this as a last attempt to reach out, to warn anyone who will listen. I know this message may sound like the ramblings of a desperate man, but I assure you, it is the truth. My son is the Antichrist, the beginning of the end. He will charm and deceive, drawing people away from the true word of the Lord. His charisma will ensnare many, leading them astray into the darkness he represents. Please heed my warning. Do not be swayed by his apparent miracles or the seemingly benign nature of his words. No matter how convincing he seems, do not give in to his seduction. The true Lord will guide and save those who remain steadfast in their faith. Arm yourself with the knowledge of the Bible and prepare for the trials to come. I do not know what will become of me or if I will ever escape this nightmare, but I know that if you follow my son, you will be lost to the same fate that awaits him. Repent, seek the truth, and hold fast to the teachings of God. The future is uncertain, but with faith, you may find a way to stand against the impending darkness. May the true Lord bless you all.